Ethan was born into a poor family in a remote countryside in the United States. His childhood was marked by long hours of hard labor on his parents' farm, yet he always dreamed of breaking free from poverty. Unlike many around him, Ethan aspired to change his fate. His perseverance and dedication led him to win a prestigious scholarship to study abroad, an opportunity that promised a brighter future. Years of rigorous study and hard work saw Ethan graduate with distinction. Returning to the U.S., he harbored ambitious plans to carve a name for himself. With his talent and determination, he secured a position at a renowned fashion company, where he soon caught the attention of the company's influential CEO, Robert Caldwell. From his very first day at the company, Ethan displayed an exemplary work ethic. He actively sought advice from colleagues, offered help whenever possible, and volunteered for extra shifts to meet project deadlines. Even as a new employee, he meticulously listened to the management team and quickly grasped key industry insights, setting himself apart. A pivotal moment came when the company encountered a major crisis in an international fashion campaign. Ethan was the first to propose a creative yet practical solution that salvaged the project. His ingenuity did not go unnoticed. Robert Caldwell, the CEO, started paying close attention to the young man who had proved to be an invaluable asset. Emma Caldwell, the CEO's daughter and vice president of the company, was a woman of immense ambition, intelligence, and beauty. She was used to being the center of attention, yet Ethan's exceptional work ethic and confident demeanor intrigued her. Initially, she regarded him simply as a rising talent within the company, but as their professional interactions increased, her admiration for him deepened. Emma first noticed Ethan during a strategy meeting. She observed his meticulous note-taking, sharp questions, and the way he carried himself with quiet confidence. Later that day, she watched from her office as Ethan stayed late, working on project blueprints while his colleagues had left hours earlier. Curious to see how capable he truly was, Emma requested Ethan to present his current project proposal to her in a private meeting. "Ethan, I want you to go over your project proposal with me before the main board review," she said, standing at his desk. Ethan was surprised but nodded. "Of course, Miss Caldwell. When would you like to meet?" "Tomorrow morning. Be prepared." The next day, Ethan stepped into Emma's office, where she sat expectantly behind her desk. He began his presentation, outlining the key aspects of his plan. Emma listened intently, occasionally asking sharp, calculated questions. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair and gave a small nod. "That was good. You have a strong grasp of strategy, but you need to refine your execution. Work on those details." Ethan took her feedback seriously and worked on improving his proposal. A week later, Emma called him in again for another presentation. "This is your second chance to impress me, Ethan," she remarked, smirking. This time, Ethan's revisions showcased significant improvements. His confidence grew, and his ability to articulate his ideas with precision caught Emma's attention even more. "Better," she admitted. "You learn quickly." By the third meeting, Emma was convinced. She saw something extraordinary in Ethan, not just talent but relentless determination. After his third presentation, she finally acknowledged, "You're different from the others. You don't just work hard, you think ahead." "I admire that." Ethan felt a shift in her demeanor. There was more than just professional acknowledgement in her eyes. There was something possessive, as if she had found something she did not want to let go. With Emma's growing support, Ethan's influence in the company expanded. His projects were approved faster, and his ideas gained recognition. Soon, Robert Caldwell himself took note of Ethan's potential and invited him to his home for a private dinner. "I've been hearing great things about you," Robert said over a glass of bourbon. "My daughter tells me you have a vision beyond your years." Ethan smiled politely. "I try my best, sir." Robert nodded. "Ambition is good, but knowing who to align with is even better. I'd like to see how you continue to develop." That dinner solidified Ethan's place in the inner circle of the Caldwell family, but more importantly, it cemented Emma's growing interest in him, not just as a professional asset, but as something much more personal. As Ethan's presence in the company strengthened, Robert Caldwell began to push the idea of a stronger bond between him and his daughter. During one of their late-night discussions in his study, Robert leaned back in his chair and took a slow sip of his drink. "Ethan, I like ambitious men. But more than that, I like men who know how to build lasting alliances. Ethan raised an eyebrow. I understand, sir. Robert smirked. Emma likes you, and I believe you understand the value of what that means. Ethan's hands clenched slightly. He had sensed Emma's growing interest, but now her father was putting it into words. Emma is an incredible woman, he said carefully. Robert nodded. She is. And you, Ethan, are someone who can stand by her. Marry her, and your future will be secured in ways you never imagined. Ethan exhaled slowly, understanding the weight of the words. He had worked hard to get to where he was, but this was an offer that could elevate him to heights he had never dared to dream. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Emma spent more time together. Whether it was business trips, corporate events, or private dinners arranged by Robert, they grew closer. Emma had always been assertive, but now she took a softer approach with Ethan. One evening, after an important investor dinner, Emma looked at him as they walked towards her car. You know, Ethan, my father isn't wrong, she said smoothly. We make a good team. Ethan met her gaze. Is that what you want? A partnership? Emma smiled, but there was something deeper in her expression. I don't settle for anything less than the best. Ethan nodded slowly. He knew what was being offered, and he knew what accepting it would mean. He took her hand gently. Then let's not waste time. And so, the engagement was announced. It was grand, luxurious, and perfectly orchestrated by the Caldwell family. Ethan had secured his place in their world. But at what cost? The grand wedding of Ethan and Emma Caldwell was a dazzling event, attended by influential figures in the business world. The media celebrated them as the perfect power couple, yet behind closed doors, the dynamic between them quickly began to shift as the excitement of the wedding faded. Ethan soon realized that Emma's affectionate demeanor was an illusion. Once they settled into married life, her dominant and demanding nature fully emerged. She controlled every aspect of their home and professional lives, expecting Ethan to work tirelessly while maintaining complete authority over him. One evening, as Ethan returned home after a long day at work, Emma sat in their luxurious living room, sipping wine. You're late, she remarked without looking up. I had a late meeting with investors, Ethan replied, dropping his briefcase. Emma scoffed. You should have informed me. I need to know where you are at all times. Ethan clenched his jaw but remained composed. Emma, I'm doing everything I can to expand our company's success. A little flexibility would be appreciated. She set her glass down and walked toward him, eyes cold. I don't need you to think for yourself, Ethan. I need you to do what's expected. We are not equals in this marriage. As months passed, Ethan tried to make their marriage work despite Emma's controlling tendencies. But a major rift between them grew when he brought up the idea of having children. One evening at dinner, he cautiously broached the subject. Emma, I've been thinking about starting a family. Emma placed her fork down, her expression instantly darkening. You must be joking. Ethan sighed. I'm serious. We have everything, wealth, stability. A child would complete our family. Emma leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. A child would ruin everything I've worked for. I'm not sacrificing my body, my career, or my social life for a screaming infant. Ethan frowned. Emma, this isn't just about you. This is about us, about building something together. She shook her head dismissively. I built this, Ethan. You're just here because I allowed it. His hands balled into fists under the table. That's not fair. I've worked just as hard as you. Emma stood up, her tone sharp. I will not be having children, and that's final. If you don't like it, you know where the door is. Ethan remained seated, staring at her in disbelief. The woman he had married was not the same one who had once admired his ambition. He felt trapped in a golden cage, his dreams overshadowed by her relentless control. That night, as he lay awake beside her, he realized something. This was not the life he had envisioned. And something had to change. As weeks passed, Ethan found himself suffocating under Emma's oppressive control. Each day felt like a cycle of endless work, dictated by her every demand. She dismissed any idea that did not align with her vision, and Ethan, once a man of ambition, now felt like a puppet in his own life. Seeking an escape, he started spending his nights at a high-end bar in the city. At first, He only intended to clear his mind, but soon, whiskey and solitude became his only relief. Night after night, he sat at the dimly lit counter, drowning his frustrations in alcohol. "You look like a man with a lot on his mind," a soft voice interrupted his thoughts one evening. Ethan turned to see a woman standing beside him, her presence strangely calming. Olivia, one of the housekeepers from the Caldwell estate, was looking at him with quiet concern. "What are you doing here?" he asked, surprised. "I could ask you the same," she replied, sliding onto the stool beside him. "But I already know the answer." Ethan let out a bitter chuckle. "Do you?" Olivia studied him for a moment. "A man doesn't drink alone like this unless he's either lost something or trying to forget something." Ethan exhaled deeply, rubbing his temples. Maybe both. For the first time in months, he found himself speaking freely about the suffocating expectations, the constant control, the way he felt like a stranger in his own marriage. Olivia didn't interrupt, didn't judge. She simply listened. "You don't deserve to live like this," she finally said. "No one does." Ethan looked at her, seeing something he hadn't seen in a long time: genuine kindness. Not manipulation, not control, just simple, human understanding. That night, as they sat in that quiet bar, Ethan realized that Olivia was the first person in a long time who truly saw him for who he was. Not just Ethan Caldwell, the businessman, the husband, the pawn in someone else's game, but Ethan, the man who had once dreamed of something more. Ethan's troubles extended beyond his failing marriage. At work, he faced increasing pressure as a major project he had been overseeing began to falter. Investors were growing impatient, and Emma, rather than offering support, only added to his burden. "You need to fix this," she demanded one evening as they sat in their lavish mansion. "Our reputation is at stake, and I will not have you embarrassing me." Ethan rubbed his temples, exhaustion evident in his face. "Emma, I'm doing everything I can. These negotiations are complicated." "I don't care how complicated they are," she snapped. "If you can't handle it, maybe you were never cut out for this role." Her words stung. The very company he had poured his energy into now felt like another prison, much like his marriage. With each passing day, Ethan found it harder to return home. Instead, he sought solace in alcohol, spending long nights drinking in his private study. One particular night, after another argument with Emma, Ethan stumbled into the kitchen, looking for another bottle. That was when he saw her, Olivia. She was quietly wiping down the marble countertop, her long dark hair falling gently over her shoulders. Despite her simple uniform, her natural beauty was undeniable. She had the kind of beauty that didn't need makeup, the kind that shone effortlessly. Ethan sighed heavily and muttered, "I suppose I'm not the only one awake at this hour." Olivia turned, her soft brown eyes filled with quiet concern. "It's part of my job, Mr. Ethan." He let out a dry chuckle. "Right. Of course. Always working." She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You've been drinking a lot lately." Ethan scoffed, pouring himself another glass. "And?" Olivia took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "It won't fix anything." Ethan stared at the amber liquid in his glass before glancing up at her. "What would you suggest, then?" She met his gaze with quiet confidence. "Maybe you should talk to someone instead of drowning in this." For the first time, Ethan found himself pausing. He set the glass down and leaned against the counter. "And who would I even talk to?" Olivia hesitated before saying, "Someone who understands." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "And that would be you?" She exhaled softly. "I know what it's like to feel trapped." Slowly, Olivia opened up about her past. She had grown up in a small rural town, the eldest daughter in a struggling family. Her father had fallen ill, and without the means to support them, she had left school to work as a housekeeper. "My mother always told me that hard work would give me a better life," Olivia said, her voice quiet. "But sometimes, I wonder if that's true." Ethan frowned. "You deserved better." She gave him a small, sad smile. "So did you." The words lingered between them, heavy yet comforting. It was the first time Ethan felt he wasn't alone in his struggles. That night, as they stood side by side in the quiet kitchen, an unspoken understanding formed. a fragile but undeniable connection. As the days passed, Ethan found himself seeking Olivia's company more and more. Unlike Emma, she listened without judgment. She never made him feel weak for sharing his burdens. One evening, after another long day at work, Ethan stepped into the garden, where Olivia was tending to the flowers under the dim glow of the estate's lights. "You never seem to rest," he noted, stepping toward her. She looked up and smiled. "Neither do you." He chuckled. "Fair enough." There was a pause before Olivia spoke again. "Ethan, are you happy?" The question took him by surprise. For a moment, he considered lying, but then he sighed. "No, not even close." She nodded as if she already knew the answer. "Then why stay?" He looked at her, really looked at her. For months, he had been drowning, but here she was, a light in the darkness. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think you're the only person who makes me feel like myself again." Their eyes met, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Something real, something undeniable. But was he ready to face it? Ethan had spent weeks fighting to salvage his failing project, but despite his efforts, the deal collapsed. The investors pulled out, and the entire boardroom turned against him. He stood at the head of the conference table, feeling the weight of their disappointed gazes. And then, the worst happened. Emma stormed into the meeting, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she approached him. "You failed," she said coldly, her voice sharp and unforgiving. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for me?" The room fell into a tense silence. Ethan's fingers clenched at the edge of the table. "Emma, I did everything I could." "Clearly, that wasn't enough," she interrupted, glaring at him. "This company is my legacy, and I trusted you with it. Now, look at the mess you've made." One of the executives shifted uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should discuss this in private." "No," Emma snapped, her eyes burning with anger. "Everyone here needs to see what happens when you let incompetence ruin everything." Ethan felt his temper rise. His wife had just humiliated him in front of his colleagues, again. He had given everything to this company, to her, yet she still treated him as nothing more than an accessory to her success. He pushed his chair back and stood up. "If you think you can do better, Emma, then why don't you take over? Or is your only skill standing around and barking orders while others do the work?" A murmur swept across the room. Emma's expression darkened, but before she could reply, Ethan turned and walked out, his patience finally at an end. Ethan didn't return home immediately. Instead, he found himself in a bar, drowning his frustration in liquor. The bitterness of whiskey burned his throat, but it was nothing compared to the fire still simmering inside him. He lost track of time until the bartender gave him a knowing look. "Rough night?" Ethan scoffed. "You could say that." It was well past midnight when he finally stumbled back into the mansion. The house was silent, bathed in the dim glow of the moonlight. Everyone had gone to sleep, everyone except Olivia. She was waiting for him in the kitchen, her usual place when she worked late. But this time, she wasn't cleaning or preparing anything. She was just standing there, watching him. "You're home late again," she said softly. Ethan let out a tired laugh. "Guess I lost track of time." She walked over to him, her eyes scanning his face. "You're drunk." He shrugged. "What else is new?" She exhaled and reached for a glass of water, setting it in front of him. "Sit down, Ethan." For some reason, he listened. He sat down, watching as Olivia carefully placed a cold towel in his hands. She wasn't asking questions. She wasn't judging. She was just there, tending to him like she always did. "Why do you do this?" he asked suddenly. She paused, looking at him curiously. "Do what?" "Stay up. Wait for me. Care." Olivia hesitated before replying. "Because someone has to." Ethan's throat tightened. He had spent so long feeling like he was alone in this house, in this marriage. But now, looking at Olivia, he realized he wasn't. At least, not entirely. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, one that had nothing to do with alcohol. And he wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. The days that followed were different. Ethan no longer saw Olivia as just the kind-hearted housekeeper who silently took care of him. He saw her as the only person who truly saw him, as a man, not a title. Every time he walked into the house after another exhausting day, it wasn't Emma's cold gaze that met him, but Olivia's quiet concern. Every time he needed someone to listen, she was there, without judgment, without expectations. One evening, after another argument with Emma, Ethan found himself in the dimly lit study, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. He heard the soft sound of footsteps and turned to see Olivia standing in the doorway. "You shouldn't keep drinking like this," she said softly. Ethan let out a heavy sigh. "It's the only thing that numbs it all." She hesitated before stepping closer. "You don't need to numb yourself. You need to fight for what makes you happy." He looked at her, something in his chest tightening. "And what if what makes me happy is something I can't have?" Olivia swallowed hard, knowing exactly what he meant. "Then maybe you need to let it go." But Ethan wasn't ready to let go. One night, as Olivia was finishing her duties in the hallway, Ethan stepped toward her. There was no hesitation in his eyes, only certainty. "I love you," he confessed, his voice raw. "You are the woman I've been searching for. The one who sees me for who I am, not what I can offer." Olivia's breath hitched. She had been trying to suppress these feelings for so long, knowing that this was impossible. "Ethan, please," he continued, his voice shaking slightly, "can you accept a man like me?" Her heart ached at his words. "I care for you, Ethan, but we are from different worlds, and you're still a married man." Ethan reached for her hands, his grip firm yet gentle. "Just love me, and let me take care of everything else." Before she could protest further, he leaned down and captured her lips in a deep, lingering kiss. Olivia stiffened at first, her mind screaming at her to stop this, stop him. But her heart, her foolish, aching heart, gave in. She kissed him back, surrendering to the love she had tried so hard to deny. Ethan knew that he couldn't continue living this double life. If he wanted Olivia, if he wanted real happiness, he needed to free himself from Emma's grasp. The next morning, he met with his lawyer in secret. "I want all of my assets transferred to my mother's name," he said firmly. His lawyer raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about this? Emma will fight you." "I don't care," Ethan responded without hesitation. "I want to walk away from this marriage without her having any power over me." Slowly, the plan took shape. With each passing day, Ethan distanced himself more from Emma, while secretly securing his freedom. And through it all, Olivia remained by his side, waiting, hoping, loving in silence. Because soon, Ethan would no longer belong to a world of cold ambition. He would belong to her. Ethan wanted Olivia to see the world he came from, the life before wealth and expectations consumed him. So one weekend, he invited her to visit his hometown, a small, peaceful village far from the chaos of the city. As they arrived, the air felt lighter, free from the weight of his failing marriage and the pressures of his work. Olivia marveled at the open fields, the simple yet charming wooden houses, and the warmth of the people greeting Ethan like an old friend. "You look different here," Olivia observed as they walked along a narrow dirt path. Ethan smiled, inhaling the fresh country air. "Because here, I'm just Ethan. Not Ethan Caldwell, not a businessman, just me." She watched him closely and saw something in him she hadn't before. Peace. For the first time, she truly believed that together, they could build something far away from the life that had suffocated him. Days later, Ethan came home early, exhausted from work but eager for something different, something comforting. As he stepped inside, the scent of warm food filled the air. In the kitchen, Olivia stood by the stove, stirring a pot, completely unaware of his presence. Her long, dark hair was tied up loosely, a few strands framing her delicate face. Her beauty wasn't one that needed embellishment. She was effortlessly breathtaking. "You're home early," she said, startled when she finally noticed him. He leaned against the doorway, watching her with admiration. "I wanted to come home to something real." She wiped her hands on a towel and gave him a soft smile. "Dinner's almost ready. Sit down, I'll bring it to you." Instead, Ethan stepped forward and pulled her into a gentle embrace. "No rush," he whispered. "I just needed this." She hesitated for only a moment before relaxing against him. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice quiet. He sighed. "Tiring, but this makes it better." As she looked up at him, something shifted. Ethan slowly leaned down, capturing her lips in a soft, lingering kiss. It wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate, just real, just them. Their moment was shattered by the sharp sound of footsteps. Emma stood in the doorway, fury written all over her face. "What the hell is going on here?" she spat, her voice venomous. Olivia instantly pulled away, guilt flashing in her eyes, but Ethan didn't flinch. He turned to face his wife, his jaw clenched. Emma stalked toward Olivia, her eyes blazing. You think you can steal my husband while living under my roof?" Olivia's face paled. "Mrs. Caldwell, Get out," Emma screamed, cutting her off. "You're fired. Pack your things and leave this house immediately." Ethan stepped between them. "You have no right to treat her this way." Emma turned her glare to him. "No right? I am your wife. Not for much longer." His voice was steady, final. "I want a divorce." Emma's face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful bastard. After everything I've done for you, you throw me away for some lowly housekeeper?" Ethan exhaled, exhausted by her cruelty. "This was never a marriage, Emma. It was a contract, and I'm done being part of it." Emma scoffed, crossing her arms. "Fine, but don't think you'll walk away from this unscathed." Ethan ignored her threats and turned to Olivia, who stood frozen, still processing everything. "I'll come with you," he whispered. "Wherever you go, I'm going too." Her eyes welled with tears. "Ethan, are you sure?" He cupped her face gently. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." As Emma continued to scream behind them, Ethan took Olivia's hand and led her away. He had finally made his choice, and for the first time, he felt free. The divorce proceedings were swift. Thanks to Ethan's careful financial planning, Emma was left with nothing. She fought, screamed, and tried to manipulate the situation, but the prenuptial agreement and the legal transfers Ethan had arranged ensured she walked away empty-handed. As he signed the final documents, Ethan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time in years, he was truly free. Emma sneered at him as they exited the courtroom. "You'll regret this," she spat. "You threw away everything for a woman who has nothing." Ethan met her glare with an unwavering gaze. "No, Emma. I finally chose happiness over power." With the past behind him, Ethan focused on building his future. Using the assets he had safeguarded, he started his own company, one that reflected his vision, not someone else's expectations. But more importantly, he had Olivia by his side. One evening, as they stood by the quiet countryside that Ethan had once called home, he took her hands in his. "I've spent so much of my life chasing success," he murmured, "but none of it meant anything until I found you." Olivia's eyes shimmered with emotion. "Ethan," he pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a delicate diamond ring. "I don't want power, or status, or wealth. I just want you. Will you marry me?" Tears slipped down Olivia's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, I will." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a deep kiss. This time, it wasn't desperate or stolen. It was a promise of forever. Ethan and Olivia built their life together, far from the manipulations of the elite world he had once been trapped in. His business flourished, not because of wealth, but because of passion. And Olivia, no longer just a housekeeper, pursued the dreams she had once abandoned. Years later, as they sat on the porch of their countryside home, watching the sun set, Ethan held Olivia's hand and smiled. "This," he said softly, "is what happiness feels like." She rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "And it's only the beginning." And so, they lived, not in power, not in riches, but in love, for the rest of their days.